This is Liz Colburn, host of Invited. Thanks for checking out the following podcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, this is Selena and you're listening to Stories from Planet Earth. I'm here today with my fellow Public House Media podcast host, Kylie.
Hello!
Hi, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. I've never been on this side of the mic, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to get a little bit more into your podcast and your story.
For sure.
So before we dive into the actual subject matter of your podcast and your story, let's just go over the basics. Where are you from?
I am from Wisconsin, born and raised in Beloit, which is it's right at the southern part of the state, almost in Illinois. And then I have been born and raised in Wisconsin, but just moved up to Green Bay, Wisconsin 5 years ago and have lived here ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, that is one part of the country I've actually never been to. I think I just recently had somebody else from that neck of the woods on the podcast too.
Yeah, Wisconsin is so beautiful, and maybe that's just me because I've never been on a plane. I've never really traveled many places, but I have been to like every city in Wisconsin. That's something I pride myself on, and I think this state is like jam-packed with beauty and really interesting stuff. So I love it.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. I've heard it's really lush.
Yes, for sure. Driving is a little bit boring sometimes just because you feel like all you're looking at is flatlands and farms. But other than that, like once you get off of the highway and dive deeper into each community, there's definitely a lot of beauty in there.
Yeah, definitely. And so aside from being a podcast host, what else do you do?
So I just graduated from St. Norbert College up here in De Pere, Wisconsin in May of last year. I'm coming up on a year and that makes me feel really old. But I am currently waitressing. I'm a server at Olive Garden up here in Green Bay. And really I am just taking a lot of time figuring out what the heck I want to do post-graduation. And I love communication and media studies. That's what I studied in college, and having the podcast and diving deeper into that stuff is really cool for me, and that's where I'm hoping it'll take me. But outside of that, I'm also involved in the Miss America organization, so I'm currently representing the community as Miss Green Bay Area 2020.
Awesome. That is amazing.
Yeah, it's a dream I've always had. It took me 5 years to get this title, and it sucks a little bit that I am in quarantine right now during my year, but I cannot wait to get back out into the community.
And what exactly does that title entail? What do you do what's the title again? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Miss Green Bay Area 2020. And basically with it is the opportunity to promote my social impact initiative, which is actually entitled Food for Thought as well. And I've had the honor over my 5 years of being involved in the organization and representing different communities in going out, public speaking, hosting walks, and other charity events to give back to the National Eating Disorder Association. And then it was supposed to be in June, but now it will be August. I get to compete for the fourth time to potentially be Miss Wisconsin 2020. So I'm excited to see where that leads me. And whoever walks away Miss Wisconsin in August will get to represent our state at Miss America. So it's really cool to be a part of the program.
That is really, really awesome. So with that mention of your advocacy for eating disorders, that's a good segue into why. Why is that something you're so passionate about?
Sure. I've been advocating for eating disorder awareness and prevention since 2012, so when I was a sophomore in high school. And really, it all just stems from me having an eating disorder. I suffered from anorexia nervosa from pretty much kindergarten up until I was a sophomore in college. And it was something that I struggled with really hard during those times, and I'm coming out of it now, but it's something that I still struggle with. And so I wholeheartedly believe that the only way to end the stigma surrounding mental health and specifically eating disorders is talking about it until I can't talk anymore. And so it's been years and years and years, and I'm not done talking yet. And I can't wait to keep going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, really important work. And I'm glad that you're giving people a voice through that.
Thank you. It's been, like I said, and I hate to use the term like journey, but it's been a journey that I never thought I would be on. I kind of thought that being stuck in my eating disorder was my life, and that was all it was going to come out to. And so to come out of anorexia like a better, stronger person that advocates and gives back, I mean, it's somewhere I never saw my life going, but I'm so thankful that it did.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that moment that you realized that you had an eating disorder and how you kind of worked your way to the other side?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I always knew that I was different. Like I said, from like kindergarten, I was a chubby kid, and I would look around in my classes and see my peers, and they were all just smaller than me. I had a growth spurt at a very young age, so I like towered over all of my peers for most of my childhood, and I've been literally the same height since like 6th grade. So I grew up really, really tall and was like bigger than the people around me, and then eventually it all kind of evened out, and now I'm like always the shortest and smallest in the room. But that was really, really hard for me, and it was something that I didn't realize was going to turn into an eating disorder, but I just always knew that I was different and that I looked different. And that continued with me into my like later adult life. And I guess I didn't really realize that I had an eating disorder until I was in middle school. I was involved. I've always been, we were talking about this before recording, but I'm a type A. I've always been involved in like everything I can. I'm scheduled like down to the minute of pretty much every day of my life. And that's how I am comfortable. And in middle school, I was involved in like every club and everything I could be involved in. And I eventually I wasn't eating enough to give me the energy to be involved in all of these clubs. And so I ended up dropping out of some of them. I ended up dropping out of certain like accelerated classes because I just literally did not have the energy to like live and learn and do all of the things that I really enjoyed doing. But it was something that I kind of twisted to my family, that I just felt a little overextended, which I think was true. But they didn't even realize that I wasn't feeding and nourishing my body up until I got into high school. And so I feel like the moment where I realized I had an eating disorder was pretty much, it was probably middle school. And I got the lead in our middle school musical, which was super exciting for me. I got to play Mulan. It was very exciting. But I just didn't have the energy and didn't have the desire to even feed my body to have that energy. And so I had gone from being kind of like this overweight little kid to losing weight pretty quickly. And I would say between middle and high school, like in the times where I was really, really in the depths of my anorexia, I lost probably 85 to 90 pounds. And then once everyone was kind of seeing how much weight I was losing and stuff like that, that's when it kind of became more public to them too. And so what really reinforced it for me was other people being like, holy crap, you have lost a ton of weight. And so then that made me look in the mirror and be like, oh wow, maybe this is a problem. Maybe this is something outside of being on a really strict diet.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure that was a really scary moment. Like, what do you do from there?
Yeah, and it was something, I mean, even when I had the realization that I did have an eating disorder, I didn't want help at that point. I still, when I looked in the mirror, saw somebody unworthy. And I mean, it's something that I feel like I still struggle with at times. But at that point in my life, it was so bad that I was like, if I'm not thin or if I'm not considered attractive, I don't want to be alive. And so when I I looked in the mirror and I still saw things that I didn't like about myself. And so I wasn't ready to surrender to recovery yet. And so from the moments that I realized I had an eating disorder to the moments that I decided to like actively seek treatment were a couple years in between.
Right, I'm sure. When did you make that decision that you are going to try to make steps towards getting a handle on everything?
Mm-hmm. I think it was my junior year of high school. I was dating someone in high school, my high school sweetheart. We dated for like all 4 years of my high school career, and he was getting ready to like graduate. He was a year older than me. He was going off to college. And I remember we had a conversation and he was like, I feel like if I move away and go to college, I'll come back and you won't be alive. And I don't think he said it kind of in passing, and I don't think he realized how detrimental it was going to be to my like mental health journey. And obviously we aren't together and stuff like that anymore, but he's someone that I fully accredit to me recovering, essentially, because it made me realize that other people were worried about me and other people cared about me and stuff like that. Yeah, from then on, obviously I had a lot of ups and downs, but that was one moment where he was just kind of like, hey, if you were to die from this, like I would miss you and I know other people would miss you. And so then I went on to like tell my family that it was something that I was struggling with and that I wanted to go in and seek therapy. And I think my mom moved so quickly. Like I told her this was something I was going through, and I feel like less than a month later I was in therapy. She was really good about that. And like, I think she had always known it was something I was going through, but my family's kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation. Like if you're going through something, like you kind of deal with that in private. And then after you get a handle on it, you come to your family. So for me to like come out and be like, hey, this is something I'm struggling with, I think that made my mom realize the severity of the situation too.
Right. And so from there, I listened to your first podcast that actually just came out this last Monday, and I heard you talking a little bit about how after you sought out that help for yourself, you said, hey, I want to help other people have a space to do that too. And you were still in high school, right?
Yeah. This is where things like get a little bit, like the timeline of things I think kind of gets mixed up in my head, because that moment of like spreading awareness started kind of before my own recovery journey. Like I started educating people on eating disorders in 2012, but I didn't go into my own treatment until 2014. And so I feel like I just became so obsessed while I was in my eating disorder of like learning about other people that had gotten out and I read all of these, the National Eating Disorder Association website. I think they still have it. But in that time they had this whole page of stories of hope. And it was people that had overcome an eating disorder, body image issues, or workout addiction of some kind. And when they had done that successfully, they wrote into the National Eating Disorder Association. And like, I used to spend probably hours a day reading all of them. And I was like, so immersed in that and so immersed in how many people went through an eating disorder that I just really, my story aside, wanted other people to know that they weren't alone in all of that. And in doing that, like I felt less alone in my struggles too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really speaks to your character that even though you were still struggling with it, you still wanted to help other people as you were trying to deal with your own battles.
Thank you.
On your own end of things.
Yeah, it was. And I really think it ended up being such a huge motivator to me. It was like I would see other people, and I talk about this in my episode too, but I hosted an event with a couple of girlfriends, and at the end of it, like a couple of days later in my school, someone came up to me and was like, hey, this is something that I'm struggling with too. And the event that I put on helped her realize that she needed to tell her family that she was struggling too. And like, those little moments for me, like seeing other people begin the work to come out of their own eating disorder, like that really fueled a fire within me too. And like for years, I would look outward at them and be like, oh, I could never do that. Like it's so hard to explain an eating disorder to people sometimes. But like for me, it was, aside from being pretty popular in high school and like having a lot of friends, like I felt like my eating disorder was my only friend. if that makes sense. And like, it's kind of like a mourning process when you decide to recover. Like, you have to realize that you're kind of leaving this quote unquote friend that you've had for however many years, like, behind. And so I watched other people do it, and like, they would start off really nervous, and then they'd come out and be like, I'm not fully recovered, but I have a handle on it and I'm doing better, and etc. And like, they were happier once they left this like friend behind. And so it took me a couple of years to want to do that on my own, but yeah, I got there eventually.
Yeah. I think that's really amazing that through all of that, you've continued with this advocacy, even though it felt kind of like you were still grappling with it. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast and how that came to be.
Yeah. So since you're a PHM person too, I can just call him by name, but Baxter Colburn for Public House Media was a judge actually at the Miss Madison 2019 competition, which was one that I actually ended up winning. So the Miss America organization, you go in and it's literally just you and a panel of like 5 or 7 judges, and Baxter was one of them for that competition. And I remember he asked me in that interview if I ever had thought about hosting a podcast, and I was like, oh yeah, sure. And I didn't know that he was somebody that could make that happen. And I did not know at the time he was producing one of my favorite podcasts of all time, Crowned and Dangerous, which I wish that they would bring back for a revival. And I think I even mentioned that podcast in my interview. But I didn't really talk to him after him and the rest of the panel crowned me Miss Madison, but like last, I want to say November, he slid into my Instagram DMs and was like, have you ever thought about seriously hosting a podcast? And from there, we kind of threw back and forth a couple ideas, and all of a sudden it hit me in the face. I was like, why am I trying to like stem out of what the work that I've been doing for so many years? And I talked to him about rebranding my social impact initiative, or the cause that I represent in Miss America, because at the time it was entitled #End the Stigma. And that was just something branding wise I didn't really want to take into the podcast realm, because I feel like that's not super original. And then I realized, food for thought in relation to eating disorders and stuff like that. So it happened pretty quickly. And from the minute he gave me the idea, I was like, heck yeah. And I hit the ground running, and I bought all my equipment, and I've been working really hard since then to really produce something that promotes self-love, body positivity, and really something at the end of the day that if this had been around in 2012 when I was struggling, or even before, if I'd gotten my hands on this content of people saying, hey, I went through this, this, and this, and I came out of it on the other side, and I'm happy, healthy, and living, I hate to say this, but living my best life now, I think that it could have changed the entire trajectory of my life. And so from the minute Baxter asked me to do this, I've just been really trying to produce something that could potentially save someone's life, as cheesy as it sounds.
I don't think that sounds cheesy at all, because the work that you're doing, sharing your story, that's so, so impactful, I feel like.
Thank you.
Because for somebody who is struggling with something like this, or even just body imagery in general, to hear somebody who's gone through it and is now thriving, as you said, now living your best life, that's amazing, because it's somebody you can look to and say, hey, she can do it, so I can do it. So I think that's really important, and I'm super excited to see the impact that your podcast has.
Thank you. I'm really excited too, and I feel like I said that a million times in episode number 1, but it's just like, it's something that I never thought I would do, and something that I never thought realistically, like I never even thought I would live to graduate high school, let alone get my bachelor degree and move out to a new community and host a podcast. Like, what the heck? I never expected to even live this long, let alone do all of the amazing things that I've been able to do. So this project in particular just like tugs on my own heartstrings, and I hope that listeners will be able to like hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could speak directly to somebody who is in the midst of an eating disorder and wants to try to find their light on the other side of the tunnel, what would you say to them?
Well, every situation is so different, but I think really it would just be reiterating some of what I've said today. Like, you don't want to let go of this bond that you have with this almost like imaginary friend that's telling you that you'll be happier and have more friends and do all of this stuff when you lose this many pounds or run this many miles or eat this many calories. But like, the best thing that you can ever do is cut off that toxic friendship. And like, it's really, like I've said before, it's like really hard to describe it to somebody who's either never been through it or is in the midst of it. But like, really, it's just living by example and being like, hey, hang out with me a little bit. Let me show you what life is like outside of your eating disorder, and just reiterating that to them and letting them know that really, as cheesy as it sounds, if I can do it, so can you. And I don't know, I'm the kind of person where I've had those conversations with people before, and I'm so like, literally just hang out with me almost like a coach. Like, you're dealing with something at 2:00 in the morning, text me, let me know. Or if you're dealing, it's Thanksgiving and you struggle to be around food and family and that's the trigger for you, like, let me know. Just because eating disorders never really leave you. And you can definitely have good days and bad days. And eventually, like, the good days get to be more frequent than the bad days. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you really have to just live by example and showcase to the person that you're wanting to recover, to the world, kind of like I'm doing, that eventually your bad days will be few and far between. If that made any sense.
Yeah, that made sense, totally. So, as a society, what do you think that we need to do to help those that are struggling with body image or an eating disorder?
Mm-hmm. I always like to throw a couple statistics out when I get asked questions like this. The first one is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men will suffer from an eating disorder at some point in their life. And when I've done public speaking, I'm like, look around the room. Think about how many people that will be affected by this. It's so many more people than you think. And like, I struggled with it for the majority of my life and nobody knew. So it's really just keeping an eye on your loved ones and like letting them know if they are going through something, you're there. But also outside of that, looking to social media and thinking about the content that we're all following and liking and subscribing to. We live in a society that associates being thin with being healthy. And really what it comes down to is systemically changing that mindset, and realizing that like, you can be fat. That's an F word. That's not a bad word. Like, it's a description. It's not derogatory. Like, we all have fat and some people have more of it than others. That doesn't take away their value. That doesn't take away their health. You can be quote unquote fat and work out every day and eat a healthy amount of, your food plate and stuff like that. And it's just like I said, it's just systematically rewiring the way that we're thinking. And I think that's really important. And like, we're not going to be able to do that, I think, in my lifetime, unfortunately, because I think we're just so deep into it. But really, it's just like having these conversations and teaching people that like, the body that you live in is the only one that you're ever going to get. And like, they all look different, but they're all beautiful. And health doesn't have one pant size or like one calorie counter and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned briefly social media and its impact on how we see ourselves. Mm-hmm. Do you know of any, like, what do you do to kind of make your own social media a happy place?
Mm-hmm. This is something that I still am working at and trying to find a balance in. Like, I found myself today just like, Instagram is like my kryptonite. I spend so many hours a day on Instagram, sometimes just because I'm working and I do a lot of my work through Instagram, but sometimes just because I'm stuck in these like scrolling cycles and I'm on there for like hours of my day. But it's just like, It's so hard in this time, especially with quarantine going on right now. Like, I know this time has really challenged my mental health and my eating disorder recovery and just made me question, like, so many things that I thought I knew. One of them being, like, who I follow on Instagram. And, like, I've had to go through and delete people because all they were posting about is gaining the, like, quarantine 15 and stuff like that. So it's, like, ongoing work for me. But I'm going to pull up some accounts that I really, really like. I love Lizzo. I love following Lizzo on anything and everything. I think she's a body positive queen. I worship her. But it's just really, I kind of just search the hashtag pretty much daily, like body positivity, and see if I can find some new accounts that I like. And I think when I started Instagram, I looked for like body inspiration or like, I don't know if people still even refer to it as this. I feel like this makes me feel old too, like hashtag thinspo on Tumblr and stuff like that. And now it's more so I want to follow accounts that show bodies of all shapes and sizes. And like I unfollowed Victoria's Secret years ago and started following companies like Aerie and like just making little changes like that so that I don't see one body type every single day, and more so just body inclusivity and body diversity on my Instagram feed so that I'm not looking at like one thing and deeming that as ideal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think everyone needs to unfollow the freaking Kardashians. I love the show Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but like the stuff that they promote just makes me so mad. And so I unfollowed all of them too, despite still watching their show. I just can't look at their bodies and like look at the stuff that they try to sell people on a daily basis, because I'll look at it and be like, oh my gosh, why don't I look like that? And I'm like, wait, because they not only have had plastic surgery and stuff like that, but they have all this money and can work out in their mansions with their personal trainers twice a day during quarantine and stuff like that. So it's just like getting rid of stuff like that from your feed and just like, maybe the Kardashians aren't people that you even follow at this point, and good for you, but like going through your feed and thinking about stuff like that and people that you follow in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had to go through a similar sort of process with my own Instagram, because it is kind of, that comparison can be so heavy. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important for all of us to just strive to make our own social media as a place that brings us a little bit of joy.
Yeah, and for me, like before I did this kind of social media cleanse during quarantine, I would be following like, I'm trying to even think of people that I was following. They were all celebrities, and like I'd see one picture of like Gigi Hadid, and I feel like everyone knows what she looks like, but she's tall, she's slender, she's got like just like that supermodel body, and that body is beautiful, and that's a body that I strive to have for a long time. But I saw her particular one day and I was like, oh my gosh, why don't I look like that? And then I kept scrolling and I saw Kylie Jenner and I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't I look like that? And like, you can put a picture of those two women side by side, they look so different, you literally can't look like both of them at the same time. So it's just kind of like, it's just so hard, I think, with Instagram too, and like working primarily on Instagram and doing all this stuff, I spend so many hours, and it's just like getting that stuff off of my feed and showcasing. I did try to follow people that kind of have more like, a regular body, and a regular body is not anything to be ashamed of. Like, I have a regular body, you have a regular body. Like, it's just like, we can't all be held to these supermodel standards. So it's just like following people that look a little bit more like me so that I'm seeing the beauty in them, and then I can then go look in the mirror and see the beauty in me too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so looking towards your future, what is your ultimate goal when it comes to just advocacy and just generally what you are looking forward to?
Mm-hmm. I have been thinking about this a lot in quarantine as well. I've been spending a lot of time preparing for Miss Wisconsin 2020, and I will be competing with like 20 to 30 depending on competitions and stuff. A lot of them have been postponed at this point, so depending on what the Miss Wisconsin class of 2020 ends up being, but like I'll be competing with 20 to 30 of these amazing women, and only one of us will walk away Miss Wisconsin. In an ideal world, that opportunity and that job would come to me and I would be able to go to Miss America and talk about food for thought to the nation, and that would be really awesome. But no matter what, I've been spending a lot of time during social distancing thinking about this, and just like, at the end of the day, whether I find a bunch of success and followers and stuff in this, it's something that I'm always going to talk about, and it's something that I always have talked about, I guess. And so just realizing that this is a passion no matter what has been kind of a big deal for me. But I mean, I'm just really hoping that food for thought, like, people will listen to it and share it and love it, and I hope that it touches the ears of somebody that really, really needs it, because that's been the whole point of starting this podcast. And I heard a quote this morning on another podcast, and she said, I'd rather have 100 listeners that I get really good engagement with than having 100 million, listeners that I don't get good engagement with. And so I think ultimately my goal is just to like share the story of myself and other people and spread that positivity to people that need it, no matter what that number is. And gosh, I don't know. It's just, I'm at a time in my life where I really don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going. But I'm preparing right now to hopefully maybe one day be Miss Wisconsin and have the opportunity to share my passion and advocacy on that national level. And outside of that, I mean, I won't know my fate until like August 23rd. And after that, I think I'm going to have to take a step back no matter what happens and decide what the next step is. So long-winded way to say, I don't really know, but I hope that I change the world on my way.
Well, I have no doubt that you're going to change the world in one way or another, because positive people spreading their message, you're bound to change lives, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So that is pretty much all I have for you. I guess the last thing I'm going to ask is, where can everybody find you and your work?
Yeah, so my Instagrams are, I have 3, which is a lot. You can find the podcast, Food for Thought Pod _, and then you can follow me. My personal Instagram is, I've had it since 7th grade, and the name is really weird, but it's KY, 4 L's, 1 I, and 4 E's. And then you can follow Miss Green Bay Area on Instagram as well. Other than that, I mean, I'm pretty much always on Instagram, so send me a DM or friend me on Facebook. You do the whole thing. Other than that, I'm working on a Food for Thought website, which will be up hopefully pretty soon. And yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Stories from Planet Earth. If you have some time, leave us a review, and be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts. Find us on Instagram at SFPE Podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.